Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer. Apologies for my absence yesterday and my somewhat slower energy level today. I'm unfortunately a little bit ill, but thanks very much to Sarah Gon for standing in for me yesterday. Today, I'm joined by Chris Hattingh. Chris, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. Doing very well, thanks. Glad you're feeling better, and looking forward to the show.
Thank you. And also Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, welcome back to the show.
Hey, hi, man.
All right, so before we start, let me just quickly give a word from our sponsor, Bitvice. Bitvice says, exchanges are crashing, banks are on the run and being bailed out, and the money printer is going burr faster than ever before. Bitcoin was built for times like this, but it's worthless if it's kept on an exchange, which then collapses. Enter Bitvice, South Africa's only place to buy Bitcoin and have it sent directly to your own self-custody wallet. That means should Bitvice ever shut down, your Bitcoin is entirely safe, as it is fully in your control. Like having gold in your safe at home rather than at a bank with only a receipt to prove ownership. Bitvice offers advice on how to set up the best self-custody solution to achieve maximum security for your Bitcoin and keep it safe during the tumultuous times ahead. To make accumulating Bitcoin even easier, Bitvice's SAT Stacker allows you to set up repeat purchases of Bitcoin on a weekly or monthly basis. Bitvice is the safest way to accumulate Bitcoin. Head over to bitvice.io and set up your account today, or click the link in the description of this show to find out more about SAT Stacker. And we thank them very much for sponsoring us. Right. So let's get into the news of the day. This is a story that caught my eye, and it is a court action by the South African Municipal Workers Union, SAMWU. SAMWU is very upset about a law that was, or an amendment to a law that was passed last year through the Parliament, which was signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa in 2022. And the main thing that SAMWU is upset about in this is that it has a number of provisions which prevent people who are members of political parties, at least in any kind of leadership position, even down to the branch level, of being employed at local government level. The law says that municipal workers cannot hold political positions at a branch, regional, or provincial or national level. And the union said that this is a very big problem because many of their supporters are, to the surprise of no one, ANC supporters, and that this law will infringe upon their political rights guaranteed by the Constitution to join and participate in a political party. They also claim that the original draft of the bill that had been agreed to by the ANC Tripartite Alliance was only to apply this limitation to municipal managers and senior managers. So basically only the top levels of the officialdom. And that according to SAMWU, at the insistence of SALGA, the South African Local Government Association, this was extended to include all municipal employees. So it's now a pretty wide-ranging thing, and they claim that their members are already receiving letters from managers demanding that they either quit their position in a political party, mostly the ANC, as they say, or quit their job. And they say, quote, SAMWU, says, this will be a slippery slope to the eroding of our hard-won democracy. Thousands of municipal workers are now receiving letters from managers warning that unless they stand down from whichever position they may hold in a political party, they will be dismissed from their jobs. Terence, let me start with you. You've talked quite a bit about civil service reform. Is this the kind of thing that we need to see more of? And what do you make here of the union's criticism, saying that their political rights are being infringed upon?
I can't help thinking that they may well have a legal point here. My understanding is that, as the civil service regulations or laws were introduced, there was quite a lot of discussion about the scope for political activism. Certainly, the ANC has always been beholden to its trade union partners. So this is not something that I would have expected. On the other hand, I do think that there is an interesting dynamic that's coming to the fore, and I don't. It's rather contradictory. There is a recognition within the government and within, I think, certain people from the ANC in government now who understand how how untenable the situation is, that municipalities don't function. I mean, I read a figure just yesterday that apparently there's municipalities in which 60% of water disappears. Now you can just imagine the scale of collapse you've got there. Municipal governance has kind of become a byword for sloth and inefficiency and ineffectiveness. So yeah, I think this is kind of an effort to push back on that, without, if I can say this, without fully acknowledging what you're entering into. It's quite possible that this may have been drafted or proposed by consultants or by professional civil servants. We have seen stuff like this in the past. I think about a decade ago, there was a regulation that forbade people serving as city councillors from working in administrations, which is apparently quite common, particularly in smaller municipalities. As I say, I think though that before we even get into whether this is a good idea, I'm not sure that this is going to be allowed to stand. The other thing, of course, is just the enforceability of it. Does everybody know what the kind of secretary to the deputy director for waste management does on her spare time, that she might be the sort of women's coordinator of a local ANC branch? So I think the enforceability is pretty much, well, it will at best be sort of partially enforced. Is it a good thing? No, because I think that this is, well, I think it's an attempt to grapple with a real problem, and that's positive. On the other hand, I don't think this is the kind of problem that you're necessarily going to be able to snuff out with legislation. This is essentially, this should be essentially a matter of political culture. That yes, while each of these guys has a right to do whatever they want to on their own time, and being politically active is part of being a citizen, you've got to be able to drop that off at the door. I think the next thing you can say is, well, what about people who are members of the Afrikaner Bond or Rotary or the Freemasons or whatever? Also organizations where there's like chatter about, do you exercise undue influence, or you meet and just chat to business people. So I think you could be opening up a door that's maybe sort of impossible to walk through properly.
So I'm sort of in two minds about this. On one level, I think it's naive to try and entirely separate the civil service from politics, because I think even if civil servants can't officially belong to a political party, they often are still going to act in very political ways, and that you should just work to manage that. But on the other hand, we've seen through the policy of cadre deployment this incredibly toxic entangling of unions, the state, and the civil service, which has been very much to its detriment. So I can sort of see both sides in this one here. I think, though, I come down more on the, at least as a sort of temporary measure, in favor of legislation like this. Chris, what do you make of this story?
Yeah, it might be a bit too easy to think that this sort of thing would solve the issues that I think are much deeper than just legislation. It's almost like thinking, oh well, let's legislate, there must be 20 million jobs created, and therefore the sort of realities on the ground will change accordingly. But that's my Terence.
We must create jobs.
There we go. Just another edict. That's all we need. That's my gut reaction to this. I agree with Terence on sort of the issues around, will it stand or not? Maybe this is undermining the broader case to be made. If you don't consider the nuances and the real intricacies of this sort of thing, then you maybe undermine whether these reforms can be done properly over the longer term in a good, sustainable way. It's going to take a lot more work. Maybe it's a good initial jab and a good start, but I think it's deeper than this. And I don't know, lobotomies or that sort of easy problem solving, but it's going to take changes around incentives, around how you view the role of the state, the role of bureaucrats, the role then of political parties. Whereas now it's been them at the center of the politics, at the center of society and the economy, whereas it should be more in this integrated relationship with business and labor and community organizations, all that sort of stuff. I think maybe we get lost in thinking we can do a one step, one solution fixes all these deeper problems, sort of thing.
See, I think if I can just add to that, local government has been particularly badly hit by cadre deployment. You've got to understand this is the ANC's stated, written, official position that they get to put their people into the civil service, through this backroom committee, whose records apparently all disappeared for the period that Ramaphosa was in charge of it. President Ramaphosa was in charge of it, sorry, then Deputy President. This is sort of turning on its head something that the ANC has not only done, but has inculcated, into its followers as a positive good and a responsibility. Because I imagine that when it comes to deploying your loyalists to further the revolution, etc., your initial pool is probably very much those who are within your structures. Those who have shown adequate revolutionary consciousness by signing the membership form. I don't know. I really don't know how they would be able to politically square that circle. As I said, I think before the broadcast, or maybe I said this earlier. I don't know. See, my mind's not so sharp either. This may well have been something assented to without fully realizing the implications. Possibly drafted by civil servants or by consultants.
I think that's very possible.
And then it goes through, and it's like, wow, you've just undermined the whole manner in which power is actually held, and I don't think that will last for any with any durability. I think the prospects of this actually going through are slim.
So this reminds me of a bugbear of mine, which is the way that we often, as you kind of pointed out, Chris, legislation doesn't always solve the problem. So we have this Municipal Financial Management Act, which is quite onerous in its requirements for what local government needs to do to spend money. And yet it's not been very effective in cracking down on corruption. In fact, all it's really done is made people who follow the rules have a much tougher time to actually get through the business of doing government. So, and I suspect that this might have a similar thing where in the dysfunctional municipalities, I doubt anyone will lose their jobs. But still, something to keep an eye on, because at least it gets us thinking about what it's going to take to reform the civil service. All right, so let's move on to our next story. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Just on a macro point on the sort of issue of lower economic growth and freedom. So when you've got the massive bureaucratic state that we do now with lower growth and a few opportunities, then you raise the stakes for the only way to get ahead is through those political connections and those political positions. So that's why you'll have a lot more pushback against this kind of reform, because that's the only way that you can get a job really or get ahead, is because then you're protected from competition, you're ensconced in these different spheres of government. So that's that broader macro point, I think, around you increase desperation when you've got just the state that ensures, that's the only way that you get anything.
The other interesting thing is with the complexity of some of our fiscal controls, and they are quite state of the art. They should we shouldn't have the problems we do, but you often find those are weaponized against people who actually have not have made some sort of technical mistake. They didn't have the form in triplicate or whatever. And there can be enormous, a persecution of people who make those technical mistakes. But they are actually the sort of more honest people in the system. something I've heard from people who've worked in dysfunctional government departments is there's now a certain caste of people who learns how to game the system, and they are pretty much untouchable because they know how to sort of break every sort of ethical or legal stricture, but they can do it so they are still within with a strict legal definition.
Right.
You don't do a lick of work for 5 years. You're permanently on sick leave or whatever. You're directing, but you can't get this person on anything.
I remember a civil servant I worked with suddenly disappearing on stress leave for a significant amount of time. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's move on to our next story, and this is one that I think has caught a lot of people's attention. It was in the headlines over the weekend, which is that a infamous inmate of the Mangaung prison, a guy called Thabo Bester, who was found guilty of rape and murder, and he was nicknamed the Facebook rapist. He apparently had died 9 months ago in a fire in his cell, and his body was burnt beyond recognition. That was until someone took a photo of someone who looked an awful lot like him in a Gauteng shopping center. And, you might think, oh, well, this is just a coincidence. But it caused a re-examination of the case of his supposed death in prison. And it turns out that the body that was in the prison, its DNA does not match his Thabo Bester's mother's DNA. And even more suspicious, and this is the one that I can't believe that they didn't work out till now, rather than dying from smoke inhalation or burning or whatever, the body apparently suffered a severe head wound and actually was not breathing by the time the fire started, suggesting that he has in fact escaped from prison and been at large for 9 months. In fact, he may have even killed a prisoner because it's not clear who that body belongs to. He may have killed someone in his escape attempt. So what's the slightly sort of interesting twist on this story from the usual kind of government really not doing its best, the police services not really doing things, is that apparently this was a privately run prison, which signed a 25-year contract with government back in the year 2000. So, Chris, let me start with you. What do you make of this? I mean, it really seems to me like there is something very much afoot here, and I think this really kind of speaks to the larger problems that we generally see in our police and correctional services, which is that it sounds like the physical evidence was pretty clear that something was wrong here, but it took a lot of pressure by private groups to get this re-examined. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think the best thing to take from the story is that work by these private organizations, private investigation, journalism, and we rightly point out everything that is trending in the wrong direction in the country. But one of the things still that we do have is that vigorous press freedom and that investigative journalism. And I don't think you can discount that sort of thing. Of course, hoping that continues with support and civil society and all that sort of thing can at least help to bring some of the stuff to light, if not solve all these problems. So that's one thing I'm trying to hold on to, as a sort of ray of light, as it were. In terms of what else is afoot, I mean, Mr. Bester himself is afoot and enjoying his freedoms in the country. So one wonders if he'll ever be apprehended again, if he managed to concoct this elaborate scheme with those helping him, I'm sure, inside and outside the prison. Again, sort of culture of bribing, incentives, your disposition towards your position, maybe in many ways in public and private sector becoming a case of short-term enrichment versus what is a good job or what is your duty or all that sort of stuff. And I mean, that's a much wider conversation, boils down to things like education, etc., but a confluence of many factors. And you wonder maybe why this happens less often.
Terence, what do you make of this story? I mean, the character himself is quite shocking in that he appears to have been able to have run a company from prison and fooled a large number of people, including some celebrities, into thinking that he was some sort of PR manager or something like that. What's your take on this?
Well, this is sort of where Shawshank Redemption, Silence of the Lambs, and Catch Me If You Can come together, isn't it? No, it's dreadful. he would not have been able to do this without some sort of collusion by people in the prison system. But yes, you're quite correct here. He addressed this gala banquet launch of his company, supposedly from his luxury suite in Manhattan, actually from his prison cell with a white backdrop. It's sort of just. I would like to say it beggars belief, but it doesn't. I think Chris is quite correct that we can be very, very grateful that we do live in a free society where some people do take their obligations to the common weal seriously. But I think unfortunately we don't find an enormous amount of that in these key nodes where it matters. It's the same reason why you have flows of guns to gangs on the Western Cape. I think it's Mark Shaw wrote that book, Give Us More Guns, and it talks about how really recognizable notorious gangsters could walk into a police station and come out with firearms licensed. I mean, I know guys who've jumped through every hoop legally, you can sort of wait 2 years. Apparently, if you're armed and dangerous with a criminal record, you can get it in a week. So I suppose the one thing I can say to our listeners is it is possible to turn this sort of thing around. If you look at a situation like Hong Kong, the police service there into the 1960s was notoriously corrupt, and even as then the British authorities started to make it possible for locally recruited staff to advance to upper positions, a lot of them wouldn't do it because they were getting paid off by the gambling dens and whatever. But with proper forceful leadership and actually holding people to account, and quite publicly, Hong Kong developed a reputation as being a sort of lawfully run society. Something that's kind of fallen apart now with mainland China stepping in. But you get the point,
right? No, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's actually a very big shame that you bring up the Hong Kong police, because until the suppression of freedom in Hong Kong, they were very well respected by people in the population as being a model police force. But anyway, okay, let's move on to our next story. And this is from Transnet, who of course run our transport rail systems. And they're looking into what they are calling ghost trains. Now, anyone who's been paying attention to the news in the show knows that PRASA, so the passenger subsidiary of the rail system, found that it had a large number of ghost employees, something up to, I can't remember, it was like maybe even 40% of all the employees on the payroll. And now apparently we've got ghost trains from Transnet. So apparently this is a train that runs on the rail system, but is not invoiced by Transnet, and the money goes to the parties who are sort of organizing the train or maybe being paid off. So it looks the trains are basically using the tracks for free without paying the company, and instead paying off someone else, presumably at a reduced rate. What's kind of also a little bit disturbing about this is that Transnet appears to have had no idea that these ghost trains were running on their system until they got an anonymous email to the board, which gave extensive details of how the scams were being run. Chris, what do you make of this?
I mean, maybe I should be happy that there's still rail for the trains on which to run. Maybe that's something to be grateful for. But no, I mean, pointing to the wider malaise, if I can put it kindly in that way, at Transnet and this idea of turning it around. I mean, even now, this proposed concession on the corridor from Joburg to Richards Bay, 20 years, getting the private sector involved. Transnet remains the custodian of the infrastructure. So even now, if you've got investment in Transnet and PRASA, for example, this body that has led to these sorts of things happening, the ghost trains as the latest example, that's still going to persist, these issues. So where do you turn that around? I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's a very wide scale and deep problem that I'm not sure if there's the the understanding ideologically of changing it. You're seeing some pragmatic concessions, yes. So this concession, for example, but not reforming to the extent that you're going to lessen the possibility of this sort of thing taking place again in the future.
Terence, what do you make of this story? When I sort of mentioned it to you in the pre-show chat, you kind of shook your head in disgust.
More bemusement than disgust. I mean, like, how can you, the train's a big thing, it's like there, people get on it. It's on, you just don't know. Yeah, I'm sure there's a sort of episode of Supernatural that would deal with this.
But there's the clever part. If you just drive away commuters, then no one will get on the train in the first place, so no one can actually see if the train is there or not.
Look, quite seriously, I think Chris hits the nail on the head that the people who created the situation want control over the means to resolve it. I think, quite seriously, at the end of it, until someone really gets perp walked and goes to prison, quite a few people do, and have their luxury cars at the dealership in Mpumalanga confiscated. There's it's a question of incentives. There's no things aren't going to be done any differently, but there's no way it sort of takes the biscuit that there's like a ghost.
What's interesting to me about this is kind of how it really shows that some of these management processes are really lacking in these companies, right? In these state-owned enterprises in particular, but I know that this is true for a lot of layers of government, is that the senior leadership, even if they're not corrupt, which is rare enough, don't actually know what's going on, because they don't seem to have these kind of mechanisms to properly, apparently no one is really keeping very close eye on which trains are using which tracks at which times. As you can imagine, this is rather a problem, especially if, someone gets a little bit greedy and decides to triple book the train line. I can't imagine that's going to work out too well. Chris, any final thoughts on this?
No, just the I guess the sadness of the whole situation, because if you really wanted to bring more economic opportunities to people, there's no better way maybe than reliable rail transportation.
Yeah,
and that's been hollowed out. So if you really wanted that sort of transformative economy, this sort of low-hanging fruit with getting basic railway services right. So even there, like the extractive mindset of the ANC up until this point and how much it's affected people who really could have benefited from it the most.
Now you've got rotten fruit.
All right. So just for our final thoughts, in about 2 minutes or so, Terence, you wrote a article last week, and I think it came out on Friday on the dailyfriend.co.za, about how there were not really any solutions on display last week from the EFF, and not just the EFF, with regards to the shutdown. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, look, for me, the thing that stood out most powerfully was the way that the EFF had been promoting what was essentially a political response to a national problem. And Malema said something to the effect of, "We will only rescue this country on the picket lines." And I think this sort of politics as the solution is what has brought us to the impasse we are at present. South Africa needs better governance. But I do concede one point. The EFF correctly identifies that you need a different kind of politics in order to get the better governance, and from that to get the economic system functioning properly. It's just that they're offering nothing beyond this kind of revolutionary bravado. And I think it deserves to be pointed out that this has also been very much the way that the ANC has approached things. And I'll go one step further than that. I think this has been, one of the great curses of post-independence Africa, the dominion of the professional politician. There's been a lot said since 1994 about South Africa being an interventionist developmental state. Well, you need a state that can function first of all. And if one looks at the way that a society like South Korea or Taiwan or latterly China, despite the fact that you had quite controlling governments at times, the civil service was staffed in many respects by their best and brightest, and they were given the latitude to actually make things happen. So while you had your culture of a 10% off the top, things were done, and there was a certain pride and satisfaction in working for an institution of state that was actually getting things done. A Chinese culture has a bureaucratic tradition that goes back like 4,000 years or something. So yeah, with all of its problems, what we have here is a culture in which politics, and particularly this, I think, a very destructive, verbose, revolutionary politics, has just crowded out the solutions that we really need.
No, definitely. Think you're right on that one. All right, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you all tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.